Hello everyone and welcome to today's presentation. I'm excited to have you here. Today we'll be exploring Mega Goal 2.1, focusing on Unit 2, Crime Doesn't Pay. Our main topics will be the form, meaning, and function related to this theme. Over the next few minutes, we'll dive into understanding how crime is portrayed, what it signifies, and why it doesn't lead to success. So let's get started and see what we can learn together. Today, we will explore the rules to do the exercises correctly. First, we'll look at how to use time expressions for the past, which helps us place actions accurately in time. Then, we'll practice applying these expressions so you get comfortable using them in context. We'll also focus on differentiating between different past tenses, such as the past progressive and simple past. Understanding how to use the past progressive correctly is essential, especially when describing ongoing actions in the past. We'll cover the past with used to and would, which are useful for talking about habits or repeated actions in the past. Additionally, we'll learn how to form the past simple tense of be properly, ensuring your sentences are grammatically correct. Remember, mastering these rules will help you communicate past events clearly and confidently. Today, we're going to focus on the simple past tense. This tense is used to talk about actions that happened at a specific point in the past. It's one of the most common tenses we use when recounting past events. The key point to remember is that the simple past is usually formed by adding ed to regular verbs, like walk becoming walked. However, there are many irregular verbs, such as go, which becomes went, and have, which becomes had. Understanding how to correctly form and use the simple past helps us tell stories, describe experiences, and talk about completed actions clearly. Throughout this presentation, you'll see how mastering this tense is essential for effective communication when discussing past events. It's a fundamental building block in learning English, making your narratives more precise and natural. Today, we'll look at some examples of actions completed in the past using the simple past tense. First, we have, his mother arrived yesterday. This sentence shows that his mother came and left, and the action happened at a specific time, the day before today. Next, he washed his car 2 days ago. Again, the action of washing the car was completed a couple of days back. Then there's, last year I traveled to Japan. This indicates a specific time frame in the past, last year, and a completed action of traveling. Finally, I saw a movie yesterday. This is another example of a past action that happened at a definite time. The key point here is that the simple past tense is used to talk about actions that started and finished in the past, often with a clear time reference. Understanding these examples helps us recognize the tense when we're describing past events in conversation or writing. All right, let's take a closer look at the examples on this slide. We see the words were and was. These are the past tense forms of the verb to be. When we're talking about something in the past, we use was with singular subjects like he, she, or it. For example, he was poor, or it was cold yesterday. On the other hand, were is used with plural subjects like they, we, or you. For instance, they were happy with their test results, or we were at the park. Notice how in the examples, they were happy and he was poor show us how the verb changes depending on the subject. This is key to mastering the simple past tense of to be. Also, the slide gives us a quick reminder that to be in the past tense has two forms, was and were. Understanding when to use each form helps us speak more accurately about past situations. So remember, was for singular, were for plural. And these forms are essential in constructing clear and correct past tense sentences. Now, let's look at some examples of how to form the negative of the verb, to be, in the simple past. For instance, when talking about groups of people, we say, they were not happy with their test results. Notice how we add, not after were to make it negative. Similarly, if we want to say someone was not poor, we say, he was not poor. It's important to remember that was and were are the past forms of to be, and to make them negative, we simply insert not after them. This is a key point because it helps us communicate what did not happen or what someone was not feeling or not doing in the past. Now let's also review the singular forms. I was not, she was not, and he was not. Just like before, we add not after was to make these negatives. Understanding how to correctly form these negatives is essential for clear communication in the past tense. This connects to the overall theme of mastering past tense negatives, which is fundamental for describing past situations accurately. Now let's take a closer look at how we use was and were with the word complement. First, remember that was and were are the past tense forms of the verb to be. They are used to describe the subject in the past. When forming questions with to be, the key point is that we put the verb before the subject. For example, if I want to ask about a person's whereabouts yesterday, I say, "Where were you yesterday?" Notice how were comes before you. Similarly, if I want to ask when someone was sick, I say, "When was she sick?" Here, was is placed before she. Let's look at some examples to clarify this. For instance, "Where were you yesterday?" asks about location in the past, while "when was she sick?" asks specifically about the time she was unwell. The main idea is that to create questions with be in the past tense, you simply reverse the typical sentence order by placing the verb before the subject. This is a fundamental rule when forming questions in simple past tense with was and were. Understanding this will help you ask clear, correct questions about past events, which ties into our overall goal of mastering past tense communication. Today, we're focusing on the past simple tense, specifically how to correctly form sentences about completed actions. On this slide, we see two examples. First, she, write her homework. To complete this sentence correctly, we need to use the past simple form of write, which is wrote. So the full sentence becomes, she wrote her homework. Next, we have got on its own, and the sentence is he, get an A in the English test. The past simple form of get is got. Therefore, the correct sentence reads, he got an A in the English test. The key point here is that for regular and irregular verbs in the past simple tense, we often add ed for regular verbs, but irregular verbs like write change completely, in this case to wrote, and get remains got. Understanding these forms helps us talk about past actions clearly and accurately, which is essential for effective communication, especially when sharing past experiences or recounting events. Yesterday, he had dinner in a restaurant. This is a simple example of how we use the past simple tense to talk about completed actions in the past. Notice that had is the correct past tense form of have in this context. Now let's look at the second sentence. He sold refreshing drinks. Here, sold is the past simple form of sell. We use the past simple tense for actions that happened and finished at a specific time in the past. It's important to remember that both had and sold are regular or irregular verbs in the past tense. Had is irregular, and sell becomes sold in the past. These examples highlight how we form the past simple tense to describe actions that are finished. This tense is essential for storytelling or recounting past events, which ties into our overall theme of understanding different verb tenses and their usage. Now let's look at some examples of the past simple tense in action. First, we have shopped. If I say, she went to the mall and shopped a lot, it shows that she visited the mall and did a lot of shopping. The key point here is that shopped is the past tense of shop, and it tells us that the action happened in the past. Next, we have cleaned. For example, she cleaned the rooms yesterday. This indicates that she did the cleaning yesterday, and again, cleaned is the past tense form of clean. Using the past simple tense helps us talk about completed actions in the past clearly and effectively. Remember, when describing past actions, we often add ed to regular verbs. This simple change is essential for conveying that the action is finished and took place at a specific time in the past. It's a fundamental part of the past simple tense, which is crucial for storytelling and describing past events accurately. Today, we're going to look at the simple past tense, focusing on both regular and irregular verbs. This tense is used to talk about actions that happened and were completed in the past. When dealing with regular verbs, the key point is that most of them form the past by just adding ed to the base form. For example, talk becomes talked, and play becomes played. It's pretty straightforward and follows a consistent pattern. However, irregular verbs are a bit trickier because they don't follow this regular pattern. Their past forms can change completely, like go becoming went, or buy turning into bought. It's important to memorize these because they are very common in everyday language. Connecting this to the overall theme, mastering these forms allows us to talk accurately about past experiences and actions, which is essential for clear communication in English. So, understanding the difference and practicing both regular and irregular verbs will greatly improve your fluency when discussing past events. Now, let's take a closer look at how we form questions in the past tense using both regular and irregular verbs. On this slide, you'll see the key terms: regular verb and irregular verb. The main idea here is that when we ask questions about past actions, we often use the word did at the beginning. For example, if you want to ask if someone played a game yesterday, you say, "Did you play a game yesterday?" Notice that even though play is a regular verb, we don't change it to played. Instead, we keep it in its base form after did. The same goes for irregular verbs like have. If I want to ask if someone had a nice weekend, I say, "Did you have a nice weekend?" Again, have stays in its base form. The key point here is that when using did in questions, the main verb remains in its base form, whether it's a regular or irregular verb. This is a simple but important rule to remember for forming past tense questions correctly. This method makes asking questions straightforward and consistent, which is really helpful when you're trying to communicate clearly in the past tense. Today, I want to talk about how we form questions in the past tense using the simple past with both regular and irregular verbs. On this slide, I've given two examples. I watched a movie on TV last night, and I went to Dubai for my last holiday. Notice that in these sentences, the verbs watched and went are in the past tense. Now, when we make questions using these past actions, we use the auxiliary verb did. For example, what did you watch on TV last night? And where did you go for your last holiday? Here's an important point. When we use did in questions, we always keep the main verb in its base form, not the past form. So even though the action happened in the past, the main verb stays in its original form, like watch and go. Also, this slide highlights the difference between regular verbs, which add ed in the past, and irregular verbs, which change in various ways. But when forming questions, the key is to remember to use did and keep the main verb in its base form. This is fundamental because it helps us correctly ask questions about past events, regardless of whether the verb is regular or irregular. So, understanding how to structure these questions is essential for clear and accurate communication about past activities. Today, I want to talk about some important time expressions that help us refer to specific points or periods in time. These expressions are essential because they give clarity and context to our conversations and writing. When we say yesterday, for example, we're talking about the day before today. Today itself points to the current day, making it very clear when something is happening. Moving forward, tomorrow indicates the day after today, which is useful for planning or discussing future events. We also have expressions like last week and next week, which help us specify a time frame relative to the current week. Last week refers to the week that just passed, while next week points to the upcoming week. These are especially helpful when we're discussing events or plans in a more general sense. Another key point is that these expressions connect directly to our overall theme of understanding and effectively communicating time. Using the right time expressions ensures our message is clear, precise, and easy to follow. So, mastering these expressions is a big step toward improving our language skills and making our communication more effective. Today, I want to talk about some common time expressions we use when referring to the past. These words and phrases help us specify exactly when something happened. Understanding these is key to expressing ourselves clearly and accurately. First, we have words like yesterday, which refers to the day before today. It's useful for talking about recent past events. Then there's last week, last month, or last year, which point to the most recent period of that length. These are very common when sharing past experiences or stories. Next, we have ago, which is used after a time period to indicate how much time has passed since a particular event. For example, 2 days ago or 5 years ago. It helps us specify the timing precisely. We also use phrases like in the past when talking about a more general period before now, often to contrast with the present or future. Finally, expressions like earlier or before are useful when referring to a point in the past that's closer to the present moment. All of these expressions connect to the overall theme of mastering past tense communication, helping us describe past events accurately and naturally. Mastering these will improve both our speaking and writing skills when discussing past experiences. Today, we're going to look at some common time expressions that we use when talking about the past. These expressions help us specify when something happened or for how long. Recognizing these will really improve your ability to describe past events clearly. For example, words like yesterday, last week, or a year ago give a clear sense of timing. Other useful expressions include in 2010, when I was a child, or several years ago, which help add context and detail. These phrases are essential because they connect actions or events to a specific point or period in the past, making your communication more precise. As we continue with this presentation, keep in mind how these expressions fit into the overall theme of mastering tense and time references in English. They are fundamental tools for telling stories, sharing experiences, or simply describing past situations accurately. Let's take a closer look at this slide, which features a list of regular and irregular verbs. As you've seen earlier, understanding these two groups is fundamental to mastering verb forms in English. Regular verbs are quite straightforward. Most of them follow a simple pattern when forming their past tense and past participle by adding ed at the end. Think of verbs like walk, talk, or play. They follow the same pattern, which makes them easier to learn and remember. On the other hand, irregular verbs are a bit trickier because they don't follow these standard patterns. Their past tense and past participle forms often change in unpredictable ways, like go becoming went or buy becoming bought. Recognizing these irregular forms is crucial because they are very common in everyday usage. Connecting this to our overall theme, mastering both regular and irregular verbs will greatly improve your ability to communicate clearly and accurately in the past tense. So, I encourage you to familiarize yourself with these lists, practice them regularly, and pay special attention to the irregular verbs. They're the ones that often trip learners up. Today, I want to talk about how we can use used to and would to describe past habits that are no longer true. These are useful tools when we want to talk about things we did regularly in the past. The basic form is simple. We start with the verb in its infinitive form, then add used to or would, followed by the subject. For example, I might say, I used to work very hard, or I used to watch Disney cartoons when I was a child. These sentences show habits from the past that we no longer do now. It's important to remember that used to and would help us reflect on old routines or behaviors that have changed over time. When using used to or would, we're emphasizing that these actions were regular or habitual in the past. This helps us connect past experiences to the present, giving a clearer picture of how things used to be. So, whenever you're describing your past habits, think about using used to or would to make your stories more vivid and accurate. Now let's talk about how we can use used to describe past states that are no longer true. Essentially, used to helps us talk about things that were true in the past but have changed. The structure is simple. We use the verb be followed by used to, then the subject. For example, I might say, I used to be afraid of the dark, which means I was afraid of the dark in the past, but I'm not anymore. Or, I used to be overweight when I was a child, indicating a past condition that has changed. Another example is, he used to be afraid of elevators, but now he's no longer afraid. So the key point here is that Used to is a handy way to talk about past habits or states that are no longer the case. It connects past experiences to the present, helping us tell stories about how things have changed over time. Remember, it's a useful tool for sharing personal history or describing how your circumstances used to be. Now, let's talk about how we can use would in the past. You see, what can often be used instead of used to when we're talking about past habits. For example, instead of saying I used to play football, we can also say I would play football. However, there's an important distinction to keep in mind. Would can't be used to describe past states, only actions. So, if you want to describe a past state like being happy or feeling tired, wouldn't be appropriate. In summary, would is a good alternative for describing habitual actions in the past, but it doesn't work for past states. This is a key point because it helps us choose the right word depending on whether we're talking about actions or states from the past. Understanding this difference will make your use of these expressions much clearer and more accurate. All right, let's take a moment to really focus on this countdown. Starting from 5, we're building anticipation. As I go down to 4, notice how it creates a sense of momentum. When we hit 3, we're entering a critical point where everything starts to come together. 2 brings us even closer, heightening the sense of importance. And finally, 1, that's the moment of impact, the point where all the preparation culminates. This countdown isn't just a sequence. It's a way to engage your audience and prepare them mentally for what's coming next. It emphasizes the significance of each step leading up to the main message, connecting back to our overall theme of building momentum and focus in our presentations. Now let's look at how we use the past continuous tense with VEing. For example, you were working at a hospital. Here, we're talking about something you were doing at a specific time in the past. Similarly, he was working at a hospital shows that he was engaged in that activity in the past. When constructing sentences, it's important to remember the subject. For plural subjects like we, they, or you, we use were. So you were working, they were working, and so on. For singular subjects like I, she, he, or it, we use was. For example, I was working, she was working, he was working. Understanding these differences helps us form correct sentences when describing ongoing actions in the past. This concept is fundamental as we build our skills in past tense storytelling and communication. Let's look at how to express negative sentences in the past continuous tense. When we talk about what someone wasn't doing at a specific time in the past, we use not along with the past continuous form of the verb. For example, you weren't working at a hospital. Notice that after not, we use the base form of the verb with ing, which is called the present participle. Now, if we want to make this negative statement with he, we say, he wasn't working at a hospital. The key difference is that for he, she, it, or any singular subject, we use wasn't instead of weren't. When forming these sentences, remember that you, we, and they take were as the auxiliary and in the negative form weren't. For example, you weren't working. In contrast, I, she, he, or it take was and in the negative wasn't. For example, he wasn't working. These forms are essential for describing past actions that were ongoing but not happening at a particular moment. They help us add nuance and detail when talking about past situations. Now, let's take a closer look at how we form questions using the past continuous tense with WH questions. First, you'll notice the structure involves the WH words like what, where, who, when, why, and how. These are used to ask for specific information about an ongoing action in the past. Next, we have the subject, which can be you, we, they, or other plural nouns. Then, we include the auxiliary verb, were for plural subjects, or was for singular subjects, depending on the person. After that, we add the VEing form of the main verb to indicate the action happening at that time. Now, let's look at some examples. For instance, what were you doing in Dubai? Here, you is the subject, were is the auxiliary, and doing is the VEing form. Similarly, where was he studying English? This time, he is singular, so we use was, and studying is the VEing form. Remember, when forming these questions, always match the WH word and the subject with the correct form of be, was or were. This structure helps us ask about specific actions happening at a particular time in the past. By mastering this, you'll be able to ask clear, precise questions about past ongoing activities in any conversation or writing. All right, for your homework today, please turn to workbook page 236 and complete exercise, this will give you a chance to practice what we've covered and reinforce your understanding. Remember, consistent practice is key to mastering these concepts. Make sure to read the instructions carefully and take your time to do a thorough job. If you have any questions while working on it, don't hesitate to reach out. Keep up the great work, and I look forward to seeing your progress next time.